The Bellini Card by Jason Goodwin. Narrated by Stephen Hoye. Copyright 2008 by Jason Goodwin. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Farrar, Straus & Giroux and was produced in the year 2009 by Tantor Media, Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. 1. He sank slowly through the dark water, arms out, feet pointed, like a Christ or a dervish casting a benediction on the sea. The stone at his feet hit the mud with a soft explosion, his knees buckled, and in a moment he was bowing gracefully with the tide. He had always been graceful, pliant, too, when fixing a price, a man who traded and left something in the deal for the other fellow. Overhead the killer turned his head from side to side, alert to the slightest motion in the darkness, feeling the rain on his face. He stood for a few minutes, waiting and watching, before he blinked, turned, and padded softly from the bridge, to be swallowed up by the night and the alleyways of the sleeping city. The tide ebbed. The water sucked at the green weed that lined the walls, gurgled around old pilings, and slipped and receded from worn stone steps. It sank, nudging the trader closer to the sea on which, in her days of glory, the city had made her fortune. Beneath Byzantine domes, dilapidated palaces, and tethered boats, the corpse was hustled noiselessly toward the sea, arms still flung wide in a gesture of vacant welcome. Yet some obstruction, a block of stone or loop of rotten rope, must have checked his passage for a time, for when dawn broke and the tide slackened, the trader was still yards away from the deep waters of the Riva dei Schiavoni, into which he would have otherwise sunk without further trace. 2. The Sultan gave a high-pitched sneeze and patted his face with a silk handkerchief. "The Queen of England has one," he said petulantly. Rashid Pasha bowed his head. King William was dead, like Sultan Mahmud. Now he thought England and the Ottoman Empire were being ruled by little girls. As the Sultan says, may his days be lengthened. The Habsburgs have several galleries, I understand. In their dominions in Italy, whole palaces are stuffed with pictures. The Sultan dabbed at his nose. The Emperor of Austria knows what his grandfather's grandfather was like by looking at his picture, Rashid Pasha. The young Pasha folded his slender hands in front of him. What the Sultan said was true, but perfectly ridiculous. The Habsburgs were notoriously ugly, notoriously alike. They married their close relations, and the chins got bigger every generation, whereas an Ottoman prince had none but lovely and accomplished women to share his bed. Rashid Pasha tensed his shoulders. "The Austrian dogs always piss on the same spot," he said with a jocular grunt. "Who would want to see that?" Even as he spoke he knew he had made a mistake. Sultan Mahmud would have grinned at the remark, but Mahmud was dead. The Sultan frowned. "We are not speaking of dogs now." "You are right, my Padishah." Rashid Pasha hung his head. "I speak of the Conqueror," Abdulmecid said loftily, "of the blood in these veins." He held out his wrists, and the young councillor bowed, abashed. "If the picture exists, I wish for it," the Sultan continued. "I want to see it. Do you desire, Rashid Pasha, that the likeness of the Conqueror should be exposed to the infidel gaze, or that an unbeliever should possess it?" Rashid Pasha sighed. "And yet, my Sultan, we do not know where the painting might be, if indeed it exists at all." The young Padishah sneezed again. While he examined his handkerchief, the Pasha pressed on. "For more than 3 centuries nobody ever saw or heard about this picture. Today we have a rumor, nothing more. Let us be cautious, my Padishah. What does it matter if we wait another month, another year? Truth is like musk, whose grateful odor can never be concealed." The Sultan nodded, but not in agreement. "There is a faster way," he said, in a voice treacled with mucus. "Send for Yashim." 3. Close to the shoreline of the Golden Horn on the Paris side stood a fountain set up by an Ottoman princess as an act of generosity on a spot where the boatmen used to linger and drop their fares. Hundreds of fountains existed in the streets and squares of Istanbul, but this one was particularly old and lovely, and Yashim had admired it many times as he passed. Sometimes, in hot weather, he would rinse his face in the trickle of clear water that splashed down onto the tiled basin. It was those tiles that now stopped him on the street, where he stood unnoticed and aghast in the stream of traffic passing along the shore. Muleteers with their trains, porters under enormous sacks, 2 fully veiled women attended by a black eunuch, a bashi-bazouk on horseback, his sash stuffed with pistols and swords. Neither Yashim nor the ruined fountain attracted anyone's attention. The crowd flowed around him. A man standing alone in a brown cloak, a white turban on his head, watching stricken as a trio of workmen in overalls and dirty turbans attacked the fountain with their sledgehammers. It was not that Yashim lacked presence. His only lack was of something more definite. But he was used to passing unnoticed. It was as though his presence were a quality he could choose to display or to conceal, a quality that people would be unaware of until they found themselves mesmerized by his grey eyes, by his low musical voice, or by the truths he spoke. Until then, though, he might be almost invisible. The workmen did not look up as he approached. Only when he spoke did one of them glance around, surprised. "It's the bridge, Effendi. Once this has gone, then the tree, there'll be a way through here, see? Got to have a way through, Effendi." Yashim pursed his lips. A bridge linking Pera to the main city of Istanbul had been talked about for years, centuries even. In the Sultan's archives in Topkapi Palace, Yashim had once seen a sepia design for such a bridge, executed by an Italian engineer who wrote his letters back to front, as if they were written in a mirror. Now it seemed a bridge was about to be built, the new Sultan's gift to a grateful populace. Can't this fountain just be moved aside? The workman straightened his back and leaned on his sledgehammer. "What, this?" he shrugged. "Too old. New one'd be better." His eyes slid along the shore. "It's a shame about the tree." The tree was a colossus, and a welcome patch of shade and shelter on the Pera shore. It had stood for centuries. In days it would be gone. Yashim winced as the sledgehammer cracked down hard into the basin of the fountain. A chunk of stone broke away, and Yashim put out a hand. "Please, a tile or two." He carried them away carefully, feeling the old mortar dry and brittle in his palm. The boatman who took him gliding across the Horn by Kayik spat on the water. "A bridge. It'll kill us," he said in Greek. Yashim felt a shadow across the sun. He did not risk a reply. Reaching home, he laid the tiles by the window and sat on the divan, contemplating the strong lines of the twining stems, the beautiful deep reds of the tulips, which had so often refreshed his eyes as the water of the fountain had refreshed his skin. Such flaming reds were unobtainable nowadays, he knew. Centuries ago the potters of Iznik had fanned their talents to such heights that the river of knowledge had simply dried up. Blues there always were, lovely blues of Kayseri and Iznik, but not the reds beloved of the heretics who came from Iran and vanished in their turn. Yashim remembered how he had loved such tiles, where they decorated the inner sanctum of the Sultan's palace at Topkapi, a place forbidden to all ordinary men. In the harem itself, home to the Sultan and his family alone, many women had admired those tiles, and many sultans too. Yashim had seen them only because he was not an ordinary man. Yashim was a eunuch. He was still gazing at the tiles, remembering others like them in the cool corridors of the Sultan's harem, when a knock on the door announced the messenger. 4. Resid Pasha tapped his polished boot with a swizzle stick. The Sultan Mahmud, may he rest in peace, was pleased to order the construction of the bridge. He pointed his stick at the divan. The old city and Pera have been too much apart. That is also the view of the Padishah. Now Pera will come to Istanbul, Yashim said, and we will know no peace. Resid pursed his lips. Or perhaps the other way around, Yashim Effendi? Yes, my Pasha, Yashim said doubtfully. He took a seat, cross-legged on the divan. Perhaps. He tried to picture Pera subsiding into dignified silence, as the sober pashas and the minarets and the cypresses of old Istanbul spread their leisurely influence across the bridge, stilling the perpetual scrimmage of touts, tea-boys, porters, bankers, shopkeepers, and sailors that milled through the Paris streets. Where would the cypresses find space to grow? Between the Belgian hatters and the Greek peddlers, the steam presses and the foreign crowds? Old Ottoman gentlemen brought their families to Pera now and then, and led them in stately astonishment through crowds of every nationality and none, staring into the big glass windows of the shops on the Grande Rue, before embarking again for home. I understand that you know many languages, Yashim added pleasantly. Yashim did not know Resid well. The young vizier belonged to another generation at the palace school, the generation that studied French and engineering. His training had taken him beyond the boundaries of the empire. Resid's mother was from the Crimea, an exile. His family were poor. He was in his mid-20s, maybe 4 or 5 years older than the Sultan he served, but reputed to be a hard worker, pious, without ostentation, quick-thinking, and very sure of himself. Certainly he had advanced very rapidly under the eye of the old Sultan, who insisted that he learn languages and had sent him on missions to Paris and Vienna, for Mahmud had lost confidence in the official dragoman or interpreters, most of whom were local Greeks. No doubt he had considered him, too, a useful influence on his son. The Pasha shrugged. Languages, of course. It saves time. Yashim lowered his eyes. He spoke 8 languages perfectly, including Georgian, and loved 3, Greek, Ottoman, and French. The Sultan has called for you, Yashim Effendi. He is aware of the services you have rendered to his house. It was I who reminded him. Yashim inclined his head politely. There had been times when old Mahmud would roar for Yashim and present him with some dilemma that suited Yashim's peculiar talents. Many things in the harem and beyond had required his attention, not all of them mere peccadilloes. Theft, unexplained deaths, threats of mutiny or betrayal that struck at the very stability or survival of the oldest ruling house in Europe. Yashim's job was to resolve the crisis. As unobtrusively as possible, of course. Yashim knew that the air of invisibility that surrounded him should also envelop the mysteries he was called upon to penetrate. And I would remind you, Yashim Effendi, that the Sultan is very young. Yashim almost smiled. Resid Pasha's only visible affectation was a small moustache that he waxed with care, but his chin was smooth and soft. He wore the Stamboulin, that hideous approximation of Western dress that the old Sultan had officially prescribed for all his subjects, Greek, Turk, Armenian, or Jew, and that people were still learning to adopt. Yashim long ago had decided not to bother. Sultan Mehmed was young 4 centuries ago, Resid Pasha. when he took this city from the Greeks? But one would say that Mehmed had more experience. Is that what you have? Yashim wondered. At 25? Experience? Mehmed judged his interests very well, Rashid continued. He also overruled advice. But times have changed, I think. Yashim nodded. It was well put. Each of us must strive to serve the Sultan's best interests in our own way, Yashim. There will be occasions, I am sure, when you will be able to serve him with your special talent for peering into men's hearts and minds. Many others, it is natural, and no shame to them at all, serve him by their mere alacrity. His dark eyes searched out Yashim's. I understand, Yashim murmured. The young vizier seemed unconvinced. We Ottomans have many generations of understanding the ways of princes, Yashim. They give us, the Sultan is pleased to give us his orders. And we say, the Sultan has said this, or this. It shall be done. Among these orders, though, we have recognized a class of, what, watery commands, written on water, Yashim. Yashim did not stir a hair. What is written on the water cannot be read. I believe the Sultan will receive you this afternoon. Rashid raised his hand in a vague gesture of dismissal. You will have many opportunities to show alacrity, he added. I can see that it shall be so. Yashim stood and bowed, one hand to his chest. The elevation of the new Sultan, like the rising of a planet, was creating new alignments, shifts in the weight and composition of the cabals and cliques that had always flourished in the palace around the person of the all-powerful Sultan. Rashid had been singled out for advancement by Mahmud. Now Abdulmecid had confirmed his father's choice. Was Rashid's friendship, his protection, an offer Yashim could afford to refuse? Outside the vizier's office, Yashim turned and walked a long way down a carpeted corridor toward a pair of double doors flanked by motionless guards and a row of pink upholstered straight-backed chairs. The guards did not blink. What did the Sultan want, Yashim wondered, that Rashid so palpably did not? He took a chair and prepared to wait. But almost immediately the doors flew open, and a white-gloved attendant ushered him into the presence. 5. Yashim had not seen the Sultan for some years before his elevation to the throne. He remembered the skinny boy with feverish eyes who had stood pale and alert at his father's side. He expected him to have grown and filled out, the way children do to their elders' constant and naive astonishment. Yet the young man seated on a French chair with his legs under a table did not, at a glance, appear to have changed at all. He was almost preternaturally thin and bony, with awkward shoulders and long wrists concealed, but not made elegant, by the arts of European tailors. Yashim bowed deeply and approached the Sultan. Only his brows, he noticed, had developed, heavy brows above bleary, anxious eyes. The Sultan screwed up his face and opened his mouth as if to scream, then whisked a handkerchief from the desk and sneezed into it loudly and unhappily. Yashim blinked. In the Balkans, people said you sneezed whenever you told a lie. Our gracious parent always spoke highly of you, Yashim. Yashim wondered if the compliment was hollow. Mahmud had been a tough old beast, as our esteemed grandmother continues to do. Yashim cast his eyes down. The Valide, Mahmud's French-born mother, was his oldest friend in the harem. My Padishah is gracious, he said. The Sultan gave a little grunt. It was the same grunt as the old Sultan's, though higher-pitched. Our ears have received a report that concerns the honor and memory of our house, the Sultan began, a little stiffly. Mahmud would have spoken the same words as if they came from his belly, not his head. Does Bellini mean anything to you?" With a sultan one does not gape like a fish. The room, Yashim now noticed, was papered in the European fashion. "No, my Padishah, I regret. Bellini was a painter." The Sultan waved a bony hand. "It was a long time ago, in the age of the Conqueror." Yashim cocked his head. He remembered now the man who had once designed a bridge across the Golden Horn. Leonardo da Vinci, a Florentine. "From Italy, my Padishah? Bellini was the greatest painter of his age in Europe. The Conqueror summoned him to Istanbul. He made some drawings and paintings of, well, people, with colours from life." The colour seemed to have risen in the young Sultan's face as well. He was a master of portraiture. He pronounced the word well, with a French accent, Yashim noticed. Yashim thought of the tulips he had rescued from the sledgehammer. They were very pure. But to paint people— no wonder the young man was embarrassed. "The Conqueror desired that it should be so," Abdulmecid added, his blush subsiding as he spoke. "Bellini rested at the Conqueror's court for 2 years. I am told that he decorated parts of the Topkapi Palace. Fresco, it is called, with scenes that the Sultan Bayezid later removed." Yashim nodded. Mehmed the Conqueror's successor, Bayezid, was a very pious man. If this Bellini painted people, Sultan Bayezid would have been shocked. He would not have wanted such blasphemy in his palace. The young Sultan laid his bony hand on the papers on his desk. "Bellini painted a portrait of the Conqueror," he said. Yashim blinked. A portrait? Mehmed the Conqueror had been only 21 years old when he plucked the red apple of Constantinople from the Christians in 1453. An Islamic hero who became heir to the Byzantine Roman Empire of the East, master of the Orthodox Christian world, he made his empire stretch from the shores of the Black Sea to the crusted ridges of the Balkans, appointing Christian patriarchs with their staff of office, bringing the chief rabbi to the city destined, as all men said, to be the navel of the world. And he had summoned an Italian painter to his court. "The portrait, my Padishah, it still exists?" The Sultan cocked his chin and stared steadily at Yashim. "I don't know," he said quietly. There was a silence in the great room. As it lengthened, Yashim felt a shiver pass up his spine and ruffle the hairs on the back of his neck. Millions of people lived out their lives in the shadow of the Padishah. From the deserts of Arabia to the desolate borders of the Russian steppe, touched or untouched by his commands, paying the taxes he levied, soldiering in the armies that he raised, dreaming, some of them, of a gilded monarch by the sea. Yashim had seen their paintings of the Bosporus in Balkan manor-houses and Crimean palaces. He had seen old men weep by river and mountain when the old Sultan passed away. He had spent 10 minutes in the company of a youth who blushed like a girl and dabbed his nose and confessed to something he didn't know. The Padishah. It was the Padishah who spoke. "The painting, like the frescoes, disappeared after Mehmed's death. It is said that my pious ancestor had sold them in the bazaar. With that in mind, what Muslim would seek to buy what the Sultan himself had pronounced forbidden?" The word was haram. Yashim nodded. "The portrait has never been seen since," the Sultan added. "But Bellini was a Venetian, the best painter in Venice in his day." His eyelids flickered. He brought the handkerchief to his face, but no sneeze came. "Now we have word that the painting has been seen. In Venice, my Padishah." The Sultan tapped his fingers on the table and then abruptly clambered to his feet. "You speak Italian, of course?" "Yes, my Padishah, I speak Italian." "I want you to find the painting, Yashim. I want you to buy it for me." Yashim bowed. "The painting is for sale, my Padishah?" The Sultan looked surprised. "The Venetians are traders, Yashim. Everything in Venice is for sale." 6. Yashim took a caique across the Horn, directing it to drop him farther around the shore at Topani. He did not want to see the broken fountain again, or to witness the felling of that magnificent old plain. He made his way uphill, through the narrow alleys of the port. At night this place was dangerous, but in the afternoon sun it felt almost deserted. A cat slunk low on its belly, and disappeared under a broken-down green gate. 2 dogs lay motionless in a patch of shade. He found the steps and climbed briskly up the steep slopes of Pera toward the Polish residency. Most of the European ambassadors had already decamped for the summer. One by one they retreated from the heat of Pera, where the dust sifted invisibly and relentlessly off the unmade streets. They went to villa gardens up the Bosporus to conduct their intrigues and negotiations among the bougainvillea and the hyssop. Some of these summer palaces were said to be magnificent. The Russian and the British could be glimpsed, cool and white among the trees, from a caique gliding down the Bosporus. The French, the Prussians, the Swedes all had their summer palaces. Even the Sardinian consul took rooms in the Greek fishing village of Ortaköy. Stanislaw Palewski, Polish ambassador to the Sublime Porte, remained in town. It wasn't that Palewski felt the need to remain close to the court to which he was accredited. Far from it. The ordinary burdens of diplomatic life rested lightly on his shoulders. No frowning monarch or jingoistic assembly issued him daunting instructions. No labyrinthine negotiations were ever set afoot by the Polish chancellery. Poland had no monarch and no assembly. There wasn't, indeed, a Poland at all, except one of the heart, and to that Palewski was bound with every fibre of his body. Palewski had arrived in Istanbul a quarter of a century before, to represent a country that did not, except in the Ottoman imagination, exist any longer. In 1795 Poland had been invaded and divided by Austria, Prussia, and Russia, putting an end to the ancient commonwealth that had once battled the Ottomans on the Dnieper and at the walls of Vienna. "You must always try to forget what you have lost," Palewski had once remarked to his friend Yashim, "and I must always remember." On a whim, because the day was so hot, Yashim went past the gates of the Polish residency and over the Grand Rue to a cluster of Greek coffee-houses that had sprung up by the entrance to an old burial ground. Far away across the Bosporus, beyond Üsküdar, he could just make out the snowy slopes of Mount Olympus, shimmering in the heat. Yashim bought a pound of Olympian ice, wrapped in paper. He knocked several times on the peeling boards of the residency door. Eventually he pushed it open and spent a few minutes wandering alone through the ground floor of the dilapidated building. Out of curiosity he tried the dining room and found it, as he had expected, almost impenetrably dark behind the tangle of clematis at the windows. The dining table sagged in the middle, and the stuffed hard chairs ranged against the walls were green with mildew. He went through to the back of the house, wondering if Marta, Palewski's Greek maid, was in the kitchen. She was not. Through the open window he spotted a familiar figure half hidden in the tall grass, and waded out to meet his friend. Palewski lay full length on a magnificent old carpet. He was propped over a book, wearing a broad-brimmed straw hat and a pair of blue cotton trousers. His feet were bare. A glass and jug of what looked like lemonade stood at his elbow. "I brought you some ice," Yashim said. Palewski jumped. He sat up and pushed his hat to the back of his head. "Ice? Good of you, Yashim." Yashim slipped off his shoes and sat down cross-legged on the carpet. Palewski glanced at it. "Marta laid it out here. She says the sun kills the moth." "But you're in the shade." "Yes, it was too hot." A magnificent palace weave of vermilion semicircles on a black background.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?